Welcome to the Twitch Tales Recap, an interactive game of Dungeons & Dragons. I am Robert Hartley, your Dungeon Master, and here is the story so far. You are playing as Apis Hive, a non-binary hill dwarf ranger, or, as they're known in my world, dwarg. Back in episode 1, you found yourself, as an outlander ranger living on the land, finally in need of going back to a civilization, to tend to some of the items in your inventory that needed fixing or replacing. You headed to a local town called Shadridge, a tiny little frontier town of only like 100 or 200 people. There you met up with your friend, the baker, Franklin, and you met up with the town mayor, you met up with the tavern keeper, and you started to hear rumours that the mead was running late from the local apiary. So you, being the helpful adventurer that you are, headed off to the apiary to investigate. When you got there, you found the farmer/apiarist dead. Jack Creed had been murdered, it seems, in his home, and his bees had been stolen. Tracking the evidence of the crime, you found a series of goblins were the culprits. They were stealing the bees, particularly one giant, sort of potbelly pig-sized bee called Mel. They thought that the honey was some sort of liquid gold, and they were stealing it because they thought it would be useful for their people back home. So, of course, you slaughtered them all, freed Mel, and out of gratitude, she has been accompanying you on your journey as your sort of companion ever since. You returned to the town, told them of the situation, and they told you that, yes, goblins are a bit of a problem in this area, and there's a bounty on their head. So you went out to finish the job. You found a nearby town of a settlement of goblins, and you slaughtered them all. You took them home and claimed your prize, only to find that on the way home, there was a couple of elven villagers in the nearby forest that were also plagued by these goblins. They'd been attacked by goblins and trolls and such, and so you helped these elves to rebuild. You got to know these elven villagers, a series of 4 towns that are all helping each other out, known as the Four Sisters. Some of them were more welcoming of outsiders than others. Elves can be a little bit xenophobic, for sure. And you are a dwarg, so they're not super friendly. Not all of them, anyway. Immediately after helping out these villagers, you finally decided it was time to go home, so you head back for Shadridge. However, when you got to Shadridge, things weren't as they seemed. Something was amiss. A couple of people had died, and one of the elderly folk, an apothecarist called Edith, had gotten particularly frail and was on death's door. You started to investigate, only to find that it was not through natural doing, but through some sort of necromancy. After some investigation, you determined that there was a necromancer in town, a young woman called Sally, who was the weaver of Shadridge, and upon confronting her, she attacked and then fled the village, taking her shadows with her. For now, Shadridge was safe again, and so Kathleen, the local Knight of Kevosna, the law enforcement here in Shadridge, she gave you a note to take to the nearby established town, the one that is supplying Shadridge with all of their things, to say, hey, it's safe to send goods again. We haven't had any supplies from you for a while, maybe because you knew that we were having troubles. Whatever the reason, we're safe again, please send goods. On the way, you discovered the reason for the supplies not getting through to Shadridge recently. There were bandits on the road. Bandits that were working for a boss that was a manticore. They were working pretty much under threat of death and terror, and they were reluctant bandits, and so thankfully you realized this before murdering them all, and you teamed up with them to kill their boss, the manticore. After doing so, you relooted all of the supplies that he'd been stealing from Shadridge and took them back to the town. You were starting to become a rather heroic figure around the town of Shadridge. You turned around and went back to Fondurg to still deliver this message, knowing you had a task that you'd not yet completed, and dutiful as you are, you headed off to Fondurg. On the way, you noticed that there were some half-breed animals, some creatures of 2 lineages, one of rat and one of dragon, are one of squirrel and one of dragon. There seem to be a lot of half green dragon beasts in this forest around Fonderg, which was surprising to the guards once you let them know. Usually that's indicative of a green dragon moving into the area and trying to buff up his numbers and create some sort of an army. Unfortunately for you, the suspicion turned out to be correct, and a young green dragon called Lucifreak attacked the town in retaliation for you having attacked his children. A lot of drama later, and you went off on a reconnaissance mission to try and find where Lucifreak was lairing, and to see if he was a threat, if you could take the fight to him, any such tactics and strategies. But you fell into his trap, and he captured you alive. For almost an entire arc of this campaign, you were a captive in Lucifreak's lair, working with the other captives to try and bid your escape. You managed to ingratiate yourself with him a little bit, all the while discovering more and more of your abilities as a ranger. You leveled into the subclass Horizon Walker, which is a ranger class all about detecting portals and planar travel. And in my games, they are a particularly rare creature. Every generation or so, one is born with the destiny of closing up the gaps in the work of the gods. Essentially, when the gods were creating the planes, they went 99%, and then the last little bit of troubleshooting was too much work for them. They didn't care to go all the way, and so they just create Horizon Walkers from time to time, people who can seek out the anomalies in the planes, portals that shouldn't open, areas of weakness between the planes, and aim to shut them, as well as defeating any of the monsters that pass from one plane to another. And so you discovered more and more of this as you grew in abilities and talents, as you researched more in your various books that you have in your inventory and such. And after ingratiating yourself with the dragon Lucifreak, you managed to trick him into thinking that you were on his side when the king and his army came to defeat him and free the captives. You turned on him in the battle, obviously, and as he tried to flee the battle, you took a very long shot with your bow, praying to the god Altemez, god of the hunt, whom you have venerated for some time. And with the very lucky strike, you managed to take him to 0 hit points from a great distance, and won the battle. You took some of Lucifreak's scales. You looted his body, as it were, and had them made into tanned hide, which could be then turned into braces to be enchanted. After freeing your fellow captives, they said their various goodbyes, went their various ways, and started heading for their various homes, most of them elven. And yourself, after dealing with the aftermath of the dragon fight in Fonderg, one such element of aftermath being the resurrection of one of the fallen town members. The druids only had enough material components to resurrect or reincarnate one of the fallen members, and so there was a town meeting held to determine who should be the one to be revivified. It was chosen that a wizard called Vala would be resurrected. She was brought back to a new body, quite similar to her first, and spent some days getting used to that. You headed north to Shadridge, having been a little while now since you returned, and obviously they had no idea what had happened. You got there dreading that something else had happened in Shadridge in your absence, but found that it was relatively going ahead as normal. Obviously the day-to-day problems of a frontier town on the outskirts of a great expanse of forest. But when you went to meet with your friend Mosh, a sort of traveling vagabond, he confided in you that he had killed someone while you were away. It was an accident, because Mosh has been afflicted by a terrible curse, a therianthropy curse, where he turns at every full moon into a hybridized fox man, and sometimes loses track of his himself. At the latest full moon, he feared he killed someone. He has vague recollections of attacking someone in the forest, and so you, to try and comfort him, took him out to the scene of the crime to investigate, see if he actually had killed someone or if they'd escaped, if they'd managed to survive the ordeal. Through investigating the crime scene, you discovered that indeed they had survived the ordeal, but Mosh, finding little comfort in this, worries that the victim should actually be suffering a fate worse than death now, because they will likely be inflicted with his own weir curse. You tracked this victim to the local elven towns, the Four Sisters, and fearing that you may actually know who it was, one of the other fellow victims of Luciferic, one of the fellow captives whom you freed, you managed to track him down and find that yes, indeed it was an elven man called Belladel, who is now afflicted with the weir curse and struggling to fight it off before it takes hold. Belladel, being a somewhat racist elf, hating you even when you were captives together, and hating you even more now that he's afflicted with this terrible curse, did not want anything to do with you or your help, and so you left him to deal with this problem on his own. You picked up your various items that you'd left being commissioned at the Four Sisters, such as a displacer cloak from a skinned displacer beast whom you'd slaughtered along the way, and some elven arrows of entangling and such. You headed back for Mwynglofau, a drow mining town, and when you got there, you heard rumours that there were a lot of uneasy feelings in the local forest. The Great Expanse had started to feel disturbed by evil, sinister magics. Mosh was attacked by some hobgoblins at this moment, who were mistaking him for some sort of shape-shifting demon. But when he explained what he was as a werefox, they were actually aware of the no pun intended. They were aware of the curse, because the hobgoblins, as the front line in this army against demons of the Great Expanse, actually had a division of were creatures under their command. You recognized the tracks that these hobgoblins were leaving with these armored sabatoned feet, because earlier, way back when you were defeating the goblin army at the start of the campaign, one of those goblins, whom you left alive tied to a tree for interrogation purposes, was no longer there when you went back. He had instead been cut loose by some armoured sabatoned feet tracks that led northwards into the Great Expanse. You have reason to believe now that the goblins and the hobgoblins were perhaps working together. At Mwynglofau, the drow village, you met an elderly man, a wanderer hermit, sort of a gentleman who calls himself the Gravedigger. He has a cloudy eye that he got from heading to the Shadowfell and spending too much time in this plane of undeath. And now he is afflicted or gifted with the ability to see and speak to ghosts and spirits all around him. He uses this ability to head through the forest, finding people, travellers who have died horrific deaths, and putting them to rest, actually burying them, giving them graves. He took you to one such place of unrest, uneasiness, and general sinister feeling, an old graveyard he used to work at. When you got there, you noticed that there was a lot of necromantic vibes, as some of the bodies were pushing themselves back up the ground, from the ground, and attacking you. Using your Horizon Walker Ranger abilities, you used a detect portal to determine that there is a lone mountain to the north that is the source of this demon army. There seems to be some sort of shadowy portal to the underworlds that is spewing forth all of these fiends. Over the few months of your adventure so far, you had been getting subtle indications from an archfey known as the Merry Gentleman. He had been sending you prophetic dreams or sending fairies to discuss messages with you at various times. You had reason to believe that he knew something about your Horizon Walker abilities and who you were and what it meant to be a Horizon Walker, but he wasn't exactly forthcoming, as frustratingly as the Fae tend to be. And so he'd been requesting your presence at his home in the Feywild this whole time. you decided it was finally time to take him up on that. Perhaps he knew more information about how to close this demon portal and what your purpose in all of this was going to be. And so you tracked, using your Horizon Walker abilities, you tracked the location of the nearest portal to the Feywild. You went to it, and through a little bit of trial and error worked out how to open it. But when you stepped through, you discovered that transportation between the Feywild and the material plane can leave a person's memory a little bit lacking. I rolled the wisdom save for you as you stepped into the portal, and you failed it, meaning that you stepped straight back out of the portal into the material plane after some amount of time had passed, and you had no recollection of any of your time in the Feywild. So having gone there for answers and found that you do not remember those answers, it was not quite the useful trip that you'd hoped it would be. Not only had you stepped back onto the material plane, but you had stepped back onto the material plane in a completely different country. Well, technically a different island in the same country. You had a piece of parchment in your hand from the Merry Gentleman stating that you should find one of his champions, a creature known as Seed. You stumbled around this forest with your foggy mind, barely remembering why you're there, having to constantly reference the paper to remind yourself why you were there, until eventually you found this Seed. He turned out to be an elven man who had been raised by wolves, as it were, out in the forest alone. He took you back to his village, a seriously ancient elven village that was designed to protect some great magics that have been long forgotten. And what's more is he took you to one of the sentinels, a steam sentinel that, through attuning to it, allowed you to regain your sense of purpose as to why you were in the forest. It seems these sentinels are designed to try and keep people away and confuse them and such. While at Seed's village, you also met another one of the guardians of this village, a unicorn named Julius. Julius was a little more educated than Seed, but unfortunately he does not have the opposable thumbs and manual dexterity needed to fix these broken sentinels that Seed has been working on. And it seems through speaking with both Julius and Seed that your purpose in why the Merry Gentleman has sent you here is to help Seed fix these sentinels. Long story short, you discovered that there were 12 such sentinels, each built by and resembling the founder of this village, and the 12 sentinels each had a separate purpose. You were kind of kept in the dark about the reasons for them, but 4 of these broken sentinels were related to the teleportation and transportation, the barriers between the different respective elemental planes. So by fixing the water sentinel, Seed had made more stable the connection between the material plane and the water plane. Seed was currently working on fixing up the earth sentinel to do the same for the earth plane, and then after that needed to be done the fire plane and the air plane. Not the movie. Who has 2 thumbs and fixes sentinels? These guys. So Seed and you went off on a little bit of a journey to meet with some of his companions, some sentient creatures that he trades with from time to time, a race of mushroom people called myconids. While with the myconids, they tried to mind meld with you in the way that they communicate with spores and hive minding themselves together, learning of each other's experiences firsthand through memory rather than through vocalization. But when they tried to do so with you, they noticed that there was a block. The Feywild magic that was preventing you from remembering your time there was stronger than they could deal with. But they had a solution. Get us some brown mold and we will perform a ritual whereby you become more one of us, and then we can get past this block. So you did so. You fought your way through some caves and harvested some disgusting body parts of various cave animals, and you got back with some brown mold which you used to perform this ritual. Unbeknownst to you, through the sort of vague descriptions from the myconids, This ritual to become one of them was more literal than it was metaphorical, and you are literally part Myconid now. It is a reversible process, but you do not necessarily know the process of reversing this process. And so, for the time being, your character is not only a dwarg, but part mushroom as well, with some drawbacks and benefits that come with that. Thankfully, though, this ritual worked, and at this moment, we jumped back in time to the time that you went into the Feywild and acted out everything that had happened in your time there. Long story short, you spent some time training with a centaur, you leveled up, you learned more about being a horizon walker, and you got to know the Merry Gentleman a little more in his manor home. You also met another Archfey while you were there, one of the other 12 Archfey that run the Feywild, an Archfey known as the Wild Woman. She was very interested in you, as she has a fascination with all things from the material plane. While in the Feywild, you did a lot of book reading. You learned a lot more about the Shadowfell. You learned a lot more about the Feywild. You learned a lot more about closing portals and such like this. You learned a lot about the Merry Gentleman and how the Feywild, how the Archfey work. In particular, the Archfey seem to each have champions of sorts. They call them different things, but the Merry Gentleman calls his champions. And because of something he did wrong recently, the Wild Woman was there to deliver a verdict from the other council members that he was to be punished by disconnecting him from his champions for some amount of time. They also were going to switch the time dilation between the Feywild and the material plane, because that was something to do with how the Merry Gentleman had messed it up in the first place, and they were going to try and fix this. Unfortunately for you, this meant that the time dilation was fixed while you were in the Feywild, and so your time in the Feywild was a lot longer on the material plane than it felt like on the through your experience. While you were there, Vala, the wizard that you'd resurrected after the Lucifreak fight, she contacted you via a spell called Sending. Not only was this to tell you that your braces that you'd left with her were ready for collection, but it also served to warn the Merry Gentleman that something wasn't quite right. He seemed perturbed by the fact that you were able to accept such a message, such a magical message in his home. For some reason, this concerned him, and he ran off to deal with something very quickly because of that. Having learned everything you could and worried about any further time spent on this plane of existence, you headed back to the material plane. At this point, you asked the Merry Gentleman something about his champions, and in particular, if he knew your mother. There had been various times throughout this campaign that I have been hinting that your mother knew a lot about the Feywild and had a great interest in the Feywild. She taught you the language of the Fey, for instance, and how a lot of Fey creatures work. So your curiosity finally came to the surface, and you asked the Merry Gentleman if he knew your mother. And he said very irritatingly, without further information given, "Why, yes, of course, she's one of my champions." And then you stepped through the portal to get back home. This is when you woke back in the cave with the Myconids, having restored your memories to you, started to discover that you were part mushroom, and worked with Seed to fix up the Earth Sentinel, and then head to the Myconids for seeing if they could transport you back home in any way. They explained that they can transport you home through a gigantic network that connects to all of the mushrooms of the planet, but they are currently disconnected from this network because of a cave-in that happened in a part of their settlement. So you headed through the Earth Sentinel to the plane of Earth to regain some of the rock that was needed to fix up the Fire Sentinel, and also to meet an elemental that could potentially help you to move all of this cave-in. You were successful in both counts by obtaining the Ignizite rock that was needed, and also by meeting an Earth Genasi known as Spear, a bit of an ambassador of sorts, a diplomat that was more than happy to come with you to the plane of the material plane to learn more about it and see it for the first time. He seemed very interested in the rulership of your world, which I'm sure won't become a problem at any point in the future. He came back with you and assisted you in clearing out this cave-in and simultaneously fixing up the air sentinel. Then using the now fixed Earth Sentinel and Air Sentinel, you managed to use those magics to also fix the Fire Sentinel, and all 4 of them were completed. Through this much work, you have leveled up once more, and you leveled up a multi-class from Horizon Walker into Fighter as well, to take 3 levels in Fighter. This is the point that you took your Arcane Archer abilities, and you now have magic arrows as well. And so that, Apis, is where we finish the recap. This is where we're going to be starting episode 90 and the first episode of Arc 6 of the campaign. Apis, you are in the village with Apis, you are in the Drennvale village with Seed, Spear, and Julius, and ready to head home. I'll see you in there. Hey, so this was a recap of the story so far, and now that you're all caught up, you can join us live over at twitch.tv/Robert Hartley GM. Join in.